Morning. Um, it is Sunday school. My name is Douglas Griffin, September 26th. We're in the book of Genesis. I like to call this the unbiased word, where we are trying to go straight through, look at every scripture, and see what it is that God is saying based on the text, not based on stories we've heard or Sunday school lessons or movies, but what does the word actually say? So right now I'm trying to, there it is. Uh, we're in Genesis chapter 40. We're going to finish it today. And Joseph is in prison. So God appeared to Abraham, then to his son Isaac, then to his son Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. The one he loves the most is Joseph. The one he really thinks God is going to use and do things through is Joseph. Joseph's been given a coat of many colors, which all it does is makes his brothers hate him. And so um, they throw him in a pit. He is sold off to taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar. At Potiphar's house, this favored son, this wonderful son, gets in trouble through no fault of his own, and now he's in prison. Two prisoners have been thrown in with him. The Pharaoh's former butler, really his cupbearer, right? So you might say baker, and oh well, his baker and his cupbearer, right? Those are the two. Sorry. Um, so the guy who handles his liquids and the guy who handles his food. And they're troubled because they've had dreams. And so um, they want to tell their dreams to Joseph. And now we're going to listen to the dreams. I title this Interpretation Belongs to God. Yeah, so thank you so much for your patience and tuning in, Susie and Jax and Lila. Hi, uh, Minister Walker. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 40, verse 6, it says, "And Joseph came into them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad," right? Because they'd had these troubling dreams. They were sad because there was no interpreter. Uh, Good morning, family. Um, Not because they'd had the dream, just because there was no one to tell them what it meant. Because that's a thing that Pharaoh had surrounded himself with, right? Soothsayers and sorcerers and all these people. None of them are in prison at this point. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of the Lord's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" And they said, "We each have had a dream, and there's no interpreter of it." So Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? So tell them to me, please." Because he's saying, hey, God is the one that probably gave you this dream since it upset you this much. And so he knows what the interpretation is. So he'll give it to you. Ah, then the chief butler told his dream. This is Genesis chapter 40, uh, verse 8. And said to him, "Behold, in my dream a vine was before me." Now again, the butler was the one who handled his cupbearer. So a vine was before me, and in the vine there were three branches, as and it was as though it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. So we've seen that time-lapse photography where they show something and it grows, and then you see it sprout, and then the flowers come out, and then right. It's all happening in front of him like a time-lapse dream, but it's quickly happening. So like life is happening. So Joseph, well, life, that's life, right? In front of you, you're seeing something bud and then grow and then blossom. And so that's a good thing. Um, and so uh, it says, excuse me, its clusters brought forth grapes, and then Pharaoh's cup was suddenly in my hand, and I took the grapes and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said to him, "This is an interpretation of it. The three branches are 3 days." Now that came from God, because three branches could have been 3 months or 3 years, or there's three different people. So God just told him that means 3 days. The rest of it, pretty obvious, right? What it meant, because he used to do that and he saw himself doing it again. I'm putting the cup in Pharaoh's hand and he's drinking from it and everything's fine. So Joseph, you could see, to me, when I hear this dream, I say, oh yeah, I don't know where we got the 3 days from. That was good because it could have been three anything. Well, he got it from God when I don't know where he got it from. Interpretation belongs to God. That's the name of the lesson. Um, Now, God often speaks, not often. There are times in the Bible where God speaks through dreams. In Judges chapter 7, Gideon has been told by God, and there's a reason for it, which is what I'm trying to get to. Why did these people have this dream at this time in front of Joseph? They'd been there, we think probably a year. They were put there, probably, most Bible scholars think they were put there on Pharaoh's birthday a year ago. Somehow they displeased Pharaoh and he put them in jail. And now, a year later, Pharaoh's birthday is coming up, and both men are going to see Pharaoh again. So they've been there for a year. And why now? Why is God giving them this dream? I think it has a purpose. So we'll discuss that. Um, God had spoken to Gideon in the book of Judges, and he wanted him to go and attack the Midianites. And so Gideon did not want to do it. Remember, Gideon said, if this is really God, I know an angel just suddenly appeared before me, but what if I'm crazy and hallucinating? So this is really God, then I'm going to put a lamb's wool, and in the morning when I wake up, I put it on the ground. I want the ground to be wet and the lamb's wool to be dry. So the next morning, that's how it was. He says, okay, that could have been a coincidence. So tomorrow when I wake up, I want only the lamb's wool to be wet and the ground to be dry. Woke up, that's how it was. I said, okay, this must be God telling me to do this. Now, we're not going to be successful when we put out fleeces. When we put out that's called putting out a fleece, because that's what the fleece was called. The lamp thing was called a fleece. Um, because God has said to us, I'm going to speak to you in your heart. I'm going to write my laws in your heart. And so that is often a way God's going to speak to us. And in fact, there's like a hierarchy of ways that God speaks to us. But it's not, if God is speaking to you for sure, and then you still decide to test God, you need to be careful. Okay, God, if that's really you, I want you to make my car rise up in the air, or uh, God doesn't enjoy being tested that way if it's really you. But sometimes we have no idea, right? God isn't speaking on the inside. We can't feel that. And then it's okay to say, okay, I really need a sign because I just have no idea. That's where Gideon was. He had no idea because God was not on the inside of the Jews at that point. He was always speaking from the outside. Us, God's on the inside. So that's going to be the primary way he speaks. And if he's spoken and we know it's God and we just don't want to believe it, then we walk on dangerous ground when we start asking for signs. There was kings in the Old Testament where they knew what to do. They just didn't want to believe it. So they asked for a sign, and God sent a lying spirit instead. Because they already knew what to do, they just didn't want to do it. So they wanted a sign telling them to do the opposite. So God said, okay, here's a sign telling you to do the opposite, because you know what to do. But if you're not going to listen, then I'm going to give you what you want. And they ended up doing the opposite and running into the disaster, because that's what they really wanted to do. They didn't want to follow God. Gideon wants to follow God. He just wants to make sure it is God. So at this point, he took 10,000 soldiers, and God said, no, that's too many. Once you divide them, remember he gives them the test, take them down to the river and then see which ones take the water and drink like this and which ones just put their face right in it. And so the ones who took the water and drank like this and kept their eye out, there's only 300 of them. The ones that looked down straight into the water and drank it up, 9,900, 9,700. Anyway, God said, keep the 300 and send home the 9,000. So Gideon at this point only has 300 people. Now they're trained, they're good because they knew to drink like this and keep their eyes up and not to look down. But still, it's only 300 of them. And there are what look like hundreds of thousands of Midianites. So Gideon's like, I don't think. So here's what happens to him. In Judges chapter 7, verse 9. And it happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, Arise, go down against the camp where the Midianites are, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you're afraid to go down, then go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterwards your hand shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. So if you're afraid to attack them, then sneak down and listen to what they're saying. Now, God didn't tell them what they were going to be saying. And a lot of times God doesn't tell us part two. He just says, go do part one. And he waits for you to be obedient. And once you take that step, then he tells you the next step. Then he tells you the next step. This is how he works. So then he went down with Purah. This is Judges chapter 7. I'm like around verse 10 right now. Then he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, right? And their camels were without number as the sand by the seashore in multitude. So like, oh my, he's sticking at hundreds of thousands. Like this is 300 of us. And of course, God does this on purpose because he doesn't want you to have faith in your numbers. He wants you to have faith in him. He says, you could go down with 1,000,000 people, but if I'm not on your side, you're going to lose. You can go down there with 300 people, and if I'm on your side, you're going to win. And that's just a truth of life, right? If God is sending you, you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so, and when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion, and he said, I've had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. Now, okay, so, and it came to a tent, and it struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. It was just a loaf of barley bread, and it knocked down my tent, and the tent collapsed. Just a loaf of bread, like nothing. And it was barley bread, and barley bread is, at that time, was the bread of poor people. It was kind of rough and hard to eat, and only poor people could really afford the barley bread. In fact, we know that barley term from John 6:9, when Jesus is looking at the 5,000. He's got to feed the 5,000, and somebody says to Jesus, hey, there is a lad who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? And again, that barley, that was the whole idea why they were he's got 5 barley loaves, so you know. So the cheapest bread, now the Jews at this point were not prosperous at all, so they were known for having barley bread, having to eat barley bread. The Midianites had a more prosperous civilization that had been established for hundreds of years, right? The Jews at this point had just gotten to this, they weren't established. So his friend says to him, who's hearing the dream, then his companion answered and said, this is Judges chapter 7, verse 14. That is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel, who into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. Like, if that bread that knocked down that tent, that's a dream from God. Clearly Gideon is about to come and knock us all down. And so it was when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation belongs to God, that he worshiped, and he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. Like, this man had a dream. God gave that man that dream that night and had him tell his friend just as Gideon was sneaking up. There are no coincidences. We think, oh, when this coincidence I ran into so-and-so, you got, what is God up to? When somebody's on your mind, you haven't seen them in 10 years, and then suddenly you run into them, you have to go, you have to say, okay, this is not a coincidence. I was just thinking about you. I haven't seen you in 10 years. I just ran into you. You know, things happen like that, and you go, that's not a coincidence. So he just happened to show up right as the man was telling the dream, and the interpretation went, and now he had the courage. Okay, so Joseph is hearing this dream back to the prison, and like, I know what this means. Certain things are obvious, right? So Genesis chapter 40, verse 13, back to Joseph. he tells the guy with the three grapes that are growing and blossoming, and he's taking the grapes and he's putting them in the cup and he's putting back in Pharaoh's hand. He says, now within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, according to the former manner when you were his butler. You, that's you saw yourself doing it in that dream. That's what's going to happen. But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness uh, to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. So here's a situation. Uh, I did this kindness to you. You do kindness to me. Now, interestingly enough, that's Joseph wasn't quite in a position because I don't know, as you know, or may not know, the guy didn't remember Joseph. Joseph's been sitting here in this prison. Joseph's been waiting for God to do something, and Joseph's like, this is it. When you get out, this is my way out. When you get out, go to Pharaoh, tell him about me that I'm down here, and then I'll be free. Uh, it Now all Joseph did was say, "Here's what your dream mean." He didn't make the dream happen. He just tells him, "Here's what your dream mean. Here's what God's about to do." God didn't do it because of the dream. He didn't do it because Joseph told him. It made the guy relax. He says, "Within 3 days, you're going to be back with Pharaoh." So Joseph simply says, "Here's what's about to happen." It'd be like if I look out my window and I saw the mailman coming up, and I say, "Hey, look, the mailman's coming up." And then he rings, sure enough, he rings the doorbell or something. And I didn't make it happen. I'm just the one who told you what's about to happen because I could see it. So it wouldn't, once the doorbell rang, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for you to come up to me and say, "Thank you so much for telling me that the mailman was," because he was going to do it anyway, right? So Joseph is saying, "I told you what your dream meant. So when you get up there, since I've showed you this kindness, I want you to show me a kindness." I just want to give you us examples of the types of kindness reciprocal that we see in the Bible. In 1 Samuel chapter 20, David is being pursued by Saul. David is Saul's, hey Denise and Rodney, David is Saul's replacement, right? Saul's the first king. The people wanted a king, and they wanted he had to be able to fight the enemies, and they had a vision in their head of what they thought. Here's the perfect pastor. Here's the perfect whatever. Boss, whatever. And so God gave them what they thought they wanted. We want God to give us what we need, not what we want, because sometimes we don't know what we need. We know what we want. Uh, and of course, Saul was a mess. So David was his replacement, and Saul wasn't going to allow it. Saul's like, "I'm not allowing it." Last week I was telling you how Saul went to the witch of Endor and prophesied and all, trying to get help from God. And God's like, "I've already told you that you're through. You can bring up Samuel from the dead. You can do all of it, but once I've said it, it's going to happen." So Saul's trying to kill David. Saul's like, "I will stop God." And this, Janet Skinner Horton, this is sometimes why people end up dead in the Bible. Saul knows what God has spoken, and he's going to fight God. "I'm going to stop God. I'll kill David, and then that's going to stop God's plan." So, ha ha ha. So, when he ends up dead, it's because of the level of his rebellion. It's the level of the rebellion that God would, again, you're on some desert island somewhere and you don't know anything about God, and you do something wrong. God doesn't blow you up. But when you're right in God's face and spitting in his face and saying, "No, I'm not going to do that, God," one of us is going to die. Well, it's going to be you. So, so he's rebelling. He's trying to kill David, right? He's trying to kill David. Saul's son, though, Jonathan, is on David's side. Jonathan doesn't even know why. He just has this love for David. Well, he recognizes God's anointing on David's life. And we have to do that. Sometimes we have to say, even though this person is family or my best friend, or blah, blah. This person has God's anointing on them. So I'm going to go with that person. I'm going to, I know I've known you for 100 years, but that's the right way to go. And so Jonathan is helping David, and David's hiding out in the fields. And says, so he says, okay, David, I'm going to warn you when Saul is coming for you. I'll send out a message. And I will save your life. Okay, and make sure you get away. But you've got to do that's a real kindness, not just, hey, the mailman's about to ring the doorbell. But this is a true kindness. It says, so, and you shall not only show me the kindness of the Lord while I still live. It's like you got to repay me. Since I'm sacrificing my family, I'm going against my father, I'm going against everybody to protect you. So since I'm showing you this kindness, this is 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 14. It says, and you shall not only show me the kindness of the Lord while I still live, that I may not die, but you shall not cut off your kindness from my house forever. Because you've got to continue to show me and my family kindness since I'm turning my back on everything I know for you. Just know, not when the Lord has cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. So once you're safe and all your enemies have been dispatched, and now you're safe, because it's easy to show kindness right now because you need me, right? You need me. But will you show me kindness later when uh, when you're safe? And that's when people need your help. But once everything is fine and they're in their position and things are working out, are they going to remember the people who helped get them there? Right? So when all the enemies are cut off from the face of the earth, you still got to show me kindness. And verse 16, so Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, let the Lord require it at the hand of David's enemies. Right. So we are going to attack David's enemies. We're going to take care of David's enemies. And this covenant that we're making, because David, you are anointed, God's going to give the consequences to your enemies. Well, sure enough, Saul is killed in battle, but he had forced his son Jonathan to go with him. So they're both killed in battle, which was not what David wanted. David didn't want Saul killed. Certainly didn't want Jonathan killed. That's his best friend. He just wanted to escape. But Saul was going so against God's will. So in 2 Samuel chapter 9, David comes back after this fierce battle. And in verse 3, it says, then the king said, King David said, is there not still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God? Because David, remember, yes, I'm going to protect you and your family. And Jonathan's gone. So is there anyone left that may show the kindness of God? And Ziba said to the king, this is Saul's servant, this is actually Jonathan's servant, said, there is still a son of Jonathan who is lame at his feet. Now he's crippled in both feet, right? So he can't move, which makes you in this time period useless. They don't have the Uber to pick you up. They don't have wheelchairs. If you're not able to run and fight and move during this time period, you were just put on a little pile somewhere and just kept it locked away in a little room, because at this point there's not, you know. So he's lame in both feet. And so the king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, indeed, he's in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lodabar. Now I'm just laughing because my teacher in Bible college in 1980 was from Oklahoma. Well, the college was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he's down in Lodabar. And that's just all. So whenever I see that name, I just think of my teacher. So David goes all the way down there. Then the king sent and brought, oh, he didn't go there. He sent and brought him here. See, I'm just making stuff up. I'm so sorry. That's why you got to read every word. Then the king sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodabar. Now when Mephibosheth, that's his name, Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and he prostrated himself. Then I'm in front of the king. Plus, my grandfather tried to kill you. So he's like, this man's going to kill me. He's going to kill me. So David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually." Then he bowed himself and says, "What is your servant that you should look up on such a dead dog as I? Like, I'm just a dog." And listen, we're Mephibosheth, right? Because of the sacrifice, because of what his father had done, he had all this kindness and mercy coming to him, and he thinks, But I'm just a dog. I'm just nothing. I'm nothing, and you're showing me this kindness." And Jesus, right, it comes from the line of David. That's like Jesus showing us kindness because of what the Father has done. Look what the Father has done and provided for you. We're Mephibosheth. We don't deserve it. What did I do to deserve it? Nothing. It's what the Father did. It's because they made a covenant. So there's a covenant between this Jesus and God, that their covenant, right? The Father and the Son, they're both God. They're both God. There's only one God. But between the Father and the Son, because of that covenant, we get blessed. And so we so anyway, so that's a reciprocal kindness. I saved your life, David, and now you got to save. I'm just telling you that Joseph simply interpreted the dream and says, "Now, since I've done you this kindness," but again, he didn't make the dream happen. So when the baker does get free, it's hard for him to go up to Pharaoh and say, "I want you to release this guy." Pharaoh's like, "Why?" "Well, I had a dream and he told me what it meant." So that wasn't going to be a reason to release him. He hadn't done some great thing, when the baker is released, he forgets about Joseph. Um, he says, "For now, here he is, Genesis 40, chapter 15." He says, "For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that they should put me into this dungeon." This is Joseph pleading his case. This is why you should go up and tell. This is the reasons. Maybe I haven't done some great thing, but I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews. It's interesting that he doesn't, it's significant that he doesn't mention his brothers. It's significant. He doesn't say, "My brothers put me in prison." He says, "I was stolen away." He doesn't mention his brothers. Uh, he says, "And also I've done nothing here that they should put me in the dungeon." And he was in the dungeon. And let me tell you what their dungeon. By the way, they didn't just make dungeons. Here's what dungeons normally were. There would be a cistern um, that they'd put water in, and they would use that water to flush their toilets. Right? They'd open up a little thing, and the water would flow out and wash away all their filth. Um, or they would just poop into the well and then open it up, and then the water would carry away their filth, right? And sometimes they didn't use them for a long time, so they put prisoners in them. In Jeremiah chapter 38, verse 6, they're mad at Jeremiah. Sometimes we have Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, these books, and we're not sure what the books are about because a lot of ministers don't spend a lot of time in these books. So I just want to tell you, um, God kept warning Israel about their sin. Jeremiah would come and warn people, "You guys have to stop doing this, or otherwise God is going to judge you." Then other prophets would get up and say, "Don't believe this man. Don't listen to him. God loves us. God's about to bless us. God's about to do marvelous things for us." Now, who would you rather listen to? Probably the one who's saying, "Oh, God's going to bless you." You don't listen to the one who's saying God's about to judge you. But unfortunately, that was the one that was actually God. And sometimes we'll travel from church to church, place to place, because we want the wonderful. God just is. God's about to give you a Cadillac. I mean, there are churches that are packed to this day because the minister preaches about how God's going to give everybody in the congregation a Cadillac, and God's going to do all that. And and look, God loves us, so God is free to give us Cadillacs and stuff. I'm not. But that's not always what God is doing in our lives. God is more concerned about our character, our inward life, than our outward life. He's just more concerned about who we are on the inside. So sometimes he's not always going to give us a Cadillac and stuff because we might take that Cadillac and do bad stuff with it. God's not stupid. You know, there's some parents that we think, well, they're stupid. They gave their child everything they wanted. Looking at that child now, look how crazy their child is acting because they just are so spoiled. God's not going to spoil us because fruit that is too ripe is spoiled. He's not going to do that to us, right? He knows who can handle what. And I know that's old thinking. It's like, no, God's going to bless, and God is going to bless everybody, but He's going to bless us in the way that's best for us. And some people, if they got too much money, that would mess them up, right? Look at Joseph. Joseph had a coat of many colors, and he ended up in the pit. Then he ended up in prison. And all that was God. None of that was against God. It was all God shaping his character. That's why Joseph's where he's at. God shaping his character, right? So that he could then use him. So God's going to do what's important to shape who we are. And then he's going to put us in that position so that we can be a blessing to others. But sometimes you want to skip the character building stuff. CBS, my wife would call it. The CBS, the character building stuff that God puts us through. We just want to go straight to that exalted position. And so churches are people that preach, God's going to put you and exalt you. And if they skip that other stuff, though, sometimes, then we're like these people who were mad at Jeremiah. They're mad at Jeremiah. Don't you preach that to us. Don't you tell that God's about to judge us, which of course God did. He judged them and took them off to Babylon. So they were so mad at Jeremiah. It says in Jeremiah 38, verse 6, so they took Jeremiah and cast him into the dungeon of Malachiah, the king's son, which was in the court of the prison. And they let Jeremiah down with ropes into this. Well, and in the dungeon, there was no water but mire, just muck, because that's where they would poop in it. And usually they washed it out, but they hadn't washed it out in years. There was just mire, it says. And so Jeremiah sank in the mire. So Joseph's like, I'm in a dungeon. I'm in a cistern. I don't even know what's been in here. So he wasn't living with the butler and baker in their prison cell. He would leave his dungeon and come and wait on them and go back. And Joseph's, I was kidnapped and brought here, but he doesn't mention his brothers. And there's a reason why. We'll see. And then I'm just in here by mistake. And so that's every reason. In Joseph's mind, this is my way out. This is why I'm here. Because God is going to use this person and he's going to get me out. So Genesis chapter 40. So there's two of them, right? There's the butler, who's the cupbearer, and the baker's there too. Genesis chapter 40, verse 16. So when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, now just know that the butler is going to give me something good to say. You're going to just say something good to me. So, oh, you're going to say good stuff? Well, let me tell you my dream. Okay. So I also was in my dream. So I was in the dream is what he's trying to say. I was in my own dream. And there was three white baskets on my head. So there's three white baskets. They're on my head. And this culture would often carry baskets and stuff on their head. Very interesting. It keeps the sand from getting in stuff. There's very reasons why it's just smarter to carry stuff on your head. Uh, and in the uppermost baskets were all kind of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head. So it was for Pharaoh, but Pharaoh never got it because the birds ate it. Now, when the birds are coming eating your breads and sweetmeats, that's not a good thing, right? If you leave some food out, if the flies are swarming your food, that's like, oh, that's not good. So Joseph said, okay. So Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation of it. The three baskets are 3 days, but this is not good. Okay. So, uh, Daniel chapter 4, I want to give you an example of a dream that God gives because the dream that Gideon heard was all about victory. Sometimes God giving you a dream, it's not good. Okay. So remember, Daniel and his young friends had been taken to Babylon, just like Jeremiah was trying to predict. Jeremiah's older than Daniel. Jeremiah's predicting this stuff's going to happen. And Daniel was that first group that got carried away. Um, but they were just kids at the time when they were carried away. These three young boys, and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, right, and Daniel. So there's four of them all together. And Nebuchadnezzar is having a dream. The sorcerers, all these people couldn't interpret the dream. So Daniel's brought in. He does interpret one dream. So now Nebuchadnezzar is just like, oh, you're my guy. So let me tell you about this dream. Because the first interpretation was really good, right? Second dream goes like this. Belshazzar, okay, this is what they call Daniel in Babylon. Belshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you. That's what they call Daniel. It's really Daniel. I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you. So explain to me the visions of my dream that I have seen and its interpretation. So he says, these are the visions of my head, while on my bed I was looking, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. And the tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of the earth. Well, this is obviously a good thing, right? It's growing and it's growing, and that's exactly what Babylon was doing. Babylon was growing, and all of the known earth to that group of people. They weren't in America, they weren't in Canada, they weren't in South America, but in the Middle East and Europe, Babylon was growing to everything that they knew. So he tells them the first part. Then he says, I also saw in the vision of my head while on my bed. This is Daniel chapter 4, verse 13. And there was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. And he cried aloud and said this, chop down the tree and cut off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts get out from under it and the birds away from its branches. So this one little tree is getting chopped down and the branches are getting torn down and everything. Not good, obviously. So in Daniel chapter 4, verse 18 and 19 says, this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Oh, this is Nebuchadnezzar talking here. So this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now you, Belshazzar, but it's Daniel, declare its interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are unable to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able. For the Spirit of God, the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. Then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, was astonished for a time, and his thoughts troubled him because it was growing. But then God came down and said, chop it down. So he just kind of stared at him for a little bit. So the king spoke and said, Belteshazzar, I'm going to get this name right. Do not let the dream or its interpretation trouble you. Belteshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream concern those who hate you. I wish it was about the people who hate you. And its interpretation concern your enemies. I wish this was about your enemies and the people who hate you. But he says, they wanted to tell him, but here's what it is. You're about to get cut down. So, which is exactly what happened. So back in prison with Joseph, I'm with Joseph still in prison. Uh, so he has this dream, and he tells him, yes, the birds ate it and took everything away, and basically it never got to Pharaoh. It was for Pharaoh, but it never got to Pharaoh. So Joseph tells him, well, within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head. Now, earlier he'd said, lift up your head. This is the same translation. It's the same words. They just translated lift off your head from you. So earlier, but it's the same words because he says he will lift up your head from you. I don't know why they put an off in there. He's going to lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds are going to eat your flesh from you. You're that bread being offered to Pharaoh, but it never happens. The birds came and got it anyway. He's telling the butler, the cupbearer, you're the wine that's going to be offered to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's going to drink from the cup and receive you again. You're the bread that's gotten eaten. You're never going to get to Pharaoh. Within 3 days, you'll be gone. Now, it came to pass, verse 20 of Genesis 40, 20. Now it came to pass on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. So it should have been translated lift up their head. He lifted up their heads, which means he brought them forward and honored them. And so let me, because on your birthday, you do sorts of things like this. That's a tradition for some reason in the Middle East at this time. The Phoenicians did it, the Egyptians did it, the Babylonians did it, even Herod did it. Remember on his birthday, in Matthew 14, verse 6, it says, "But when Herod's birthday was celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod." So his wife's daughter. And therefore she promised with an oath to give her, he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. It's my birthday, so I'm going to give you whatever you want. I'm going to honor you. So she, having been prompted by a mother, said, "Give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter." Okay. And again, her mother wanted this to happen. Her mother told her to ask for that. And because she knew it's his birthday. And on his birthday, he always grants wishes. That's just the thing. It's my birthday, and so I grant wishes. Isn't that interesting? Because we have it the opposite, where we want our wishes done, but on their birthday, they would grant other people's wishes. So whatever you want. But that's because Herod's wife was also his sister-in-law and his niece. John the Baptist had to tell it. He couldn't keep it. He couldn't hold his peace. He had to tell him, "You should not be married to your brother's wife. Your brother's still alive, and it's your brother's daughter, your other brother, your older brother's daughter." And so it's just nastiness. And she didn't want to hear it. So I know how to stop John the Baptist. Cut off his head, and then to be harper his mouth to keep talking. Okay, so that's a birthday thing. Um, Jezebel did the same thing. Jezebel's married to Ahab, right? And she went to this gentleman and oh well, here she can tell you the story herself. In 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 6, he said to her, "Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, 'Give me your vineyard for money, or else if it pleases you, I will give you another vineyard for it.' So I want that vineyard, Naboth." And he answered, "I will not give you my vineyard." So Jezebel's like, "What? Okay." So in verse 8 of 1 Kings 21, it says, "And she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal and sent the letters to the elders," because she's disguising it. "I don't want anybody to know this is from me." And she sent letters to the elders and the nobles who were dwelling in the city with Naboth. Now remember, hey, we want your land. He said, no. So she sends letters to all the elders who live in the same city as Naboth. And she wrote in the letter saying, "Proclaim a fast, and seat Naboth with high honors among the people. Lift up his head, seat him with high honors among the people, and seat two men who are scoundrels before him to bear witness against him, saying, 'You have blasphemed God and the king.' Then take him out and stone him that he may die." So we're going to trick him. We're going to have this big ceremony, and we're going to honor him and put him on the throne. And then two men are going to say, "You're terrible," but he won't know, because I won't be there. My husband won't be there, but you're going to carry my dirty work for me. So this is what Pharaoh does. He takes the butler and the baker, and he lifts them up and he honors them, and he says, "You, what do you want? I want to live." "You, what do you want? I want to live too." "Well, too bad. You're going to die." And so it's my birthday, and I get what I want. It's my birthday. I cry if I want to. So Genesis chapter 40, verse 21. Then he restored, yes, it is my birthday. My wife's birthday is in 3 days. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, just like in the dream. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Again, so Joseph said, "Hey, the mailman's coming." Joseph told him what's about to happen, but once he got there, he didn't think about it. Because again, Joseph hadn't set him free. Joseph hadn't. So, and this, and God did this on purpose. Because again, it was going to happen no matter what. It didn't happen because of the interpretation of the dream. There wasn't anything for them to do. This was a dream where just God is telling them in advance, here's what's going to happen. And sometimes God is just telling you in advance what's going to happen. There's not something you're supposed to do to make it happen. There's nothing they did to make it happen. Sometimes there's something you're supposed to do, and the dream might be instructing you to do something. But in this case, God sometimes will tell you something in advance. The reason often he tells us things in advance and then we see them happen is so that when it happens, we'll know that it was God. Because sometimes we can look at something and go, oh my goodness, look what the devil did. He said, no, God already told me in advance this was going to happen. So this was God. That's why I knew in advance. This wasn't a mistake. Don't think, oh no, the devil's gotten in. There was nothing that because you might have a premonition about somebody being fired, or you losing a job or something. God like told you in advance, but he told you in advance so that you know it happened. I'm making this happen because I've got something better for you. That's why you knew 2 weeks ago. I knew this was going to happen, and then we want to be frustrated and upset about it. And God's like, no, 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 no. You knew in advance so that you would know that it was me. It's going to look bad from the outside, but don't worry, I'm in it. I'm all in it. So it will work out. So in this case, there's a reason why God is telling them in advance because he wanted Joseph to think, hey, this is my way. Well, he didn't plant that thought in Joseph's mind. He knew how Joseph would react. He knew that Joseph would go, oh, God's about to get me out of here. God, and trust me, it was a couple years that Joseph was still in that prison. He's waiting, but the guy forgot about him. And God could have given the chief butler another dream about Joseph. And he could have woken up and gone, oh, I forgot about Joseph. If God had wanted the chief butler to go to Pharaoh at that time. But he wanted him to forget because Joseph was a schemer. Joseph was a plotter in his head. He always knows how things should go. It's a gift and a curse. A lot of times our best quality is our worst quality. Uh, because Joseph knows what this person should be doing and knows what that person should be doing. He's just very good at organizing things and coming up with a plot and this, that, this way, this, that, this way. And sometimes you can just scheme yourself right out of God's plan because and I don't mean scheme in a bad way, but you can have it should work this way, and then on Tuesday it's going to happen Thursday, and God has a different plan. So God sometimes will thwart your plan so that you'll finally let go of it. And God needed Joseph to let go of it. Let go of you thinking that you know exactly how things are going to go because you're going to miss it when it's in front of your face. Because I am doing something, but you're going to miss it because you think you know exactly how it's supposed to happen. So I want you to finally go, okay, because Joseph's still holding on to his dream. Joseph is still holding on to, because his father put the coat of many colors on him, right? And my brother's going to bow down to me in Canaan land, because Joseph didn't know anywhere else. At the time Joseph had that dream, I mean, where everybody was bowing down to him, he only had been in one area. So he's assuming this is where it's going to happen. And that wasn't where it was going to happen. But that's what he's assuming. My brother's going to, and I'm going to control all this land. And God's trying to get him to let go of that. When he rose up in Potiphar's house, he's thinking, oh, great, I'm going to take over Potiphar's house and do so great. Potiphar's going to send me back to Canaan. Even in prison, he's thinking, tell Pharaoh that I'm here and I was kidnapped and I shouldn't be here. And then God's going to send me back to Canaan. He's going to release me. I'll be able to go back home. So God needs to let go of that. So when that did not happen, when he didn't hear for 2 years from this man, he finally let it go. How do we know he let it go? Because in Genesis chapter 41, in the chapter we're about to get to next week, Joseph has 2 kids. He is finally let out, right? But he has 2 kids. He says, Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, which means, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. All the toil and stuff I went through with Potiphar, and I've let that go. God has made me forget my father's house. I'm not even thinking about going back there anymore. That's what he named his firstborn child. And he says, and the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. This is where I'm supposed to be now. I finally have let that go. We think I hear when this is being taught how Joseph was so Joseph was nah, Joseph let go of God's dreams. Which, and here's the good news for us. You can, if God has a plan for you, even if you've let it go, God doesn't let it go. Joseph let it go. Joseph says, I guess I'm supposed to just be here in Egypt, and I forgot my father's house. In fact, I named my kids, I forgot my father's house, and I'm supposed to stay here. That's my names for my kids. And God's like, no, 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 no. I've just made you let go of your version of how it's supposed to happen. It's still going to happen. Your brothers will still bow down before you, but in a way that you cannot imagine. But first, you have to let it go. So God made him let it go. So sometimes God's wearing us out so that we'll let go of how we think things are supposed to happen. He will wear you out. So you let go of how you think things are supposed to happen. God has a whole other plan. If you let go, God still brings it to pass. Joseph let go and God still brought it to pass because God's not depending on us. He's going to do it because he's God. And that's the good news. We can miss it. We can mess up. We can be faithless. And God is sovereign and so merciful that it's like, this is what I'm going to do in your life. I'm just telling you about it. But I've already determined I'm going to use you in a certain way. And I'm going to put you through whatever it takes to get you to the point where I can then exalt you to put you in that position so I can use you. But I'm going to do it, not up to you. So I've already looked at your heart and determined you're somebody I can use. So you can be faithless, but eventually I'm going to do enough CBS, character building stuff, to put you in the right place so I can use you the way I want to use you. That's the good news. So even though Joseph eventually, we'll see in next week, has finally let go and says, I'm not even thinking about my father's house anymore and my brothers. Because remember, he didn't even mention his brothers earlier. I've let that go. God's plan still comes to place in Joseph's lives, and that's the good news for all of us. Okay, so thank you so much for listening in. And I am preaching today at my church, I found out. And so if you haven't gotten enough, and I imagine most of you've gotten quite enough, on Good Shepherd NBCLA at 11 o'clock will be our service from 11 to 12. Okay, and others of you, I'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Amen. Oh, exit live video. Did I do it?